Chapter 1. A glimpse into darkness, the 20th century. A century marked by progress, innovation, and, unfortunately, unparalleled brutality. Amidst the turmoil of global war, a darkness descended upon a land known for its ancient history and vibrant culture. This is the story of the Armenian Genocide, a systematic extermination of a people, a scar etched deep into the conscience of humanity. Join us as we journey back in time to uncover a chapter often shrouded in silence, a story that demands to be heard. It's a story of immense suffering, of unimaginable cruelty, but also one of resilience, of a people determined to keep the memory of their lost loved ones alive. This is not just a history lesson, it's a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the devastating consequences of unchecked hatred. Our journey will take us to the heart of the Ottoman Empire, where the seeds of discord were sown in the late 19th century. Chapter 2. The Armenian Heartlands. For centuries, the Armenian people thrived in the highlands of eastern Anatolia, a region they called home long before the arrival of the Ottoman Turks. Their history stretched back millennia, marked by the rise and fall of kingdoms, the embrace of Christianity in the 4th century, and a rich cultural tapestry woven from threads of art, music, and literature. Nestled in the shadow of Mount Ararat, a place of profound spiritual significance for Armenians, their communities flourished, cultivating the fertile valleys and establishing centers of trade and craftsmanship. The Armenian people were known for their resilience, their ability to adapt and survive in the face of changing political landscapes. They endured conquests by Persians, Byzantines, and Arabs, each leaving its mark on their cultural identity, but none managing to extinguish the flame of their heritage. When the Ottoman Turks swept through the region in the 15th century, incorporating Armenia into their vast empire, the Armenians found themselves under the rule of a new power. Initially, relations were characterized by a degree of tolerance. The Ottomans, with their policy of allowing religious minorities a degree of autonomy within their millet system, granted the Armenians a measure of self-governance in religious and cultural matters. Armenians, known for their business acumen and skills in crafts and professions, often played vital roles in the Ottoman economy. However, this period of relative harmony was not to last. As the Ottoman Empire entered a period of decline in the 19th century, tensions between the ruling elite and the Armenian minority began to simmer. Chapter 3. The Crumbling Empire. By the late 19th century, the once mighty Ottoman Empire, known as the sick man of Europe, found itself grappling with a myriad of internal and external challenges. Nationalist movements within its diverse ethnic and religious groups threatened to tear it apart from the inside. The empire, once stretching from the Balkans to the Persian Gulf, had shrunk considerably, with territories being chipped away by European powers eager to capitalize on its weakness. Military defeats and economic stagnation fueled a sense of resentment and insecurity among the ruling elite. In this climate of fear and uncertainty, the Armenians, often viewed with suspicion due to their Christian faith and perceived ties to European powers, became scapegoats for the empire's woes. Nationalist sentiments within the Ottoman government, fueled by a desire to create a more homogeneous Turkish state, began to view the Armenian minority as an obstacle to their ambitions. Propaganda spread like wildfire, painting Armenians as disloyal, untrustworthy, and a threat to the very fabric of the empire. This poisonous narrative found fertile ground in a society already grappling with economic hardship and social unrest. The Armenians, often more prosperous and educated than their Turkish neighbors, were easy targets for resentment and envy. As the Ottoman Empire crumbled, the Armenians found themselves caught in the crosshairs of a rising tide of nationalism and intolerance. What had once been a relationship marked by a degree of coexistence began to unravel, setting the stage for one of the darkest chapters in human history. Chapter 4. Seeds of Hatred. As the Ottoman Empire teetered on the brink of collapse, the Armenian community found itself increasingly vulnerable, targeted by discriminatory policies and escalating violence. The seeds of hatred, sown by years of propaganda and fueled by nationalist fervor, began to take root. The Hamidian massacres of the 1890s, a series of brutal attacks against Armenians sanctioned by Sultan Abdul Hamid II, served as a chilling prelude to the horrors that awaited. Tens of thousands of Armenians were slaughtered, their homes and businesses destroyed in a wave of violence that shocked the world. Despite international condemnation, the Ottoman government escaped any real consequences for its actions. This impunity emboldened the perpetrators and laid the groundwork for the systematic extermination that was to come. The rise of the Young Turks, a nationalist and reformist faction within the Ottoman government, offered a glimmer of hope for change. However, this hope proved to be short-lived. The three pashas, a triumvirate of powerful Young Turk leaders, Mehmed Talat, Ismail Enver and Ahmed Jamal, seized control of the government in 1913, ushering in an era of authoritarian rule and intensified persecution of minorities. Chapter 5: The Cloak of War. I bet you didn't know how World War I provided a cloak for one of history's darkest chapters. The year 1914 marked a turning point in history, the eruption of World War I plunging Europe and the world into a maelstrom of violence. For the Ottoman Empire, this global conflict provided a convenient cover for the implementation of a sinister plan. With the world's attention focused on the battlefields of Europe, the three pashas saw an opportunity to carry out their genocidal agenda with impunity. The Armenian population, already subjected to decades of escalating discrimination and violence, now faced an existential threat. Under the guise of wartime security measures, the Ottoman government began a systematic campaign to disarm Armenian soldiers serving in the Ottoman army. Stripped of their weapons and uniforms, these men, once loyal defenders of the empire, were disarmed, grouped into labor battalions and sent to their deaths. This act of betrayal was just the beginning of a carefully orchestrated plan to eradicate the Armenian presence within the Ottoman Empire. With the Armenian men effectively neutralized, the Ottoman government turned its attention to the most vulnerable segments of the population, women, children, and the elderly. On April 24, 1915, a date etched in the memory of every Armenian, Ottoman authorities began rounding up prominent Armenian intellectuals, community leaders, priests, and artists in Constantinople, now Istanbul. Hundreds were arrested, deported to the interior, and subsequently murdered. Chapter 6: Deportation into Death. The Armenian Genocide was not a spontaneous eruption of violence. It was a meticulously planned and executed campaign of annihilation. Following the arrest of the intellectuals, the Ottoman government implemented a systematic process of deportation, targeting Armenian communities across Anatolia. Families were forcibly removed from their homes, given little time to gather belongings, and driven from their ancestral lands. These death marches, as they came to be known, stretched for hundreds of miles, often leading to the desolate Syrian desert. Under the scorching sun, deprived of food and water, Armenians were subjected to unimaginable cruelty. Many died from starvation, disease, or exhaustion along the way. Those who survived the journey faced an even more gruesome fate. The Ottoman authorities established concentration camps, more accurately described as extermination camps, in remote areas of the empire, primarily in the Syrian desert. These camps were places of unimaginable suffering where Armenians were subjected to torture, rape, and mass murder. Women and girls were often separated from their families and sold into sexual slavery or subjected to horrific acts of violence. Children were ripped from their mothers' arms, forced to convert to Islam, or left to die of exposure. The Ottoman government, in its attempt to erase all traces of Armenian identity, employed systematic brutality, ensuring that few would survive to tell the tale. Chapter 7: A calculated campaign of annihilation. The Armenian Genocide was not a byproduct of war or a series of isolated incidents. It was a deliberate and systematic campaign of annihilation orchestrated by the Ottoman government. The three pashas, the architects of this genocide, oversaw the implementation of their plan with ruthless efficiency. They issued coded telegrams disguised as military orders, directing local officials to carry out the deportation and extermination of the Armenian population. These chilling documents, later uncovered by historians, provide irrefutable evidence of the government's intent. The methods employed by the Ottoman government were as varied as they were brutal. In addition to the death marches and concentration camps, Armenians were subjected to mass drownings, poisonings, and burnings. Entire villages were wiped off the map, their inhabitants slaughtered without mercy. The Ottoman authorities went to great lengths to conceal their crimes, often forcing Armenians to dig their own graves before being executed. The Ottoman government's goal was not simply to remove the Armenians from their homeland, but to eradicate them as a people. This was a genocide in the truest sense of the word, a systematic attempt to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. The scale of the atrocities committed during this dark chapter in history is staggering. Chapter 8: Witnesses to Horror. The world did not stand idly by as the Armenian Genocide unfolded. International observers, including diplomats, missionaries, and journalists stationed within the Ottoman Empire, witnessed firsthand the atrocities being committed. Their accounts, documented in diaries, letters, and official reports, provide harrowing testimony to the brutality of the genocide. Henry Morgenthau Sr., the US ambassador to the Ottoman Empire during the war, famously described the genocide as a campaign of race extermination. Morgenthau, horrified by the violence he witnessed, pleaded with the Ottoman government to stop the massacres. His pleas, along with those of other foreign diplomats, largely fell on deaf ears. The Ottoman government, determined to see its plan through to the end, dismissed reports of atrocities as enemy propaganda. Despite the Ottoman government's attempts to suppress information, news of the genocide eventually reached the outside world, sparking outrage and condemnation. International organizations, newspapers, and individuals spoke out against the atrocities, demanding an end to the violence. However, the international community's response was muted, hampered by the ongoing World War and a reluctance to intervene in the internal affairs of a sovereign nation. The Armenian people, abandoned by the very powers they had hoped would protect them, were left to face their fate alone. Chapter 9: The Rise of Nationalism. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw a surge in nationalist sentiments across Europe, affecting the Ottoman Empire. The empire grappled with nationalism among its various ethnic and religious groups. Weakened new Ottoman leaders envisioned a homogeneous Turkish nation-state. Turkish nationalism, fueled by resentment, led to intolerance and violence. Armenians, with their distinct identity, were seen as outsiders. Propaganda painted Armenians as disloyal, obstructing Turkish unity. Nationalist rhetoric sowed mistrust, justifying violence against Armenians. External pressures and territorial losses fueled Turkish resentment. This toxic mix led to the tragic plight of the Armenian community. Chapter 10: The Ottoman Decline. The Armenian Genocide cannot be fully understood without acknowledging the broader context of the Ottoman Empire's decline in the 19th century. Once a formidable power, the empire found itself grappling with a myriad of challenges that eroded its strength and sowed the seeds of internal discord. Military defeats against external enemies, particularly Russia, led to significant territorial losses and a decline in the empire's international standing. Economic stagnation, fueled by corruption, mismanagement, and the loss of vital territories, exacerbated social tensions. The Ottoman state, struggling to modernize and compete with European powers, faced mounting debts and internal unrest. In this climate of uncertainty and fear, the Ottoman government increasingly resorted to authoritarian measures and sought scapegoats to deflect blame for the empire's woes. The Armenians, often perceived as more prosperous and educated than their Muslim counterparts, became easy targets for resentment and suspicion. This perception was further fueled by the empire's attempts at reform, known as the Tanzimat era. While intended to modernize and centralize the Ottoman state, these reforms often had the unintended consequence of increasing tensions between the Muslim majority and non-Muslim minorities. The reforms, aimed at creating a more unified Ottoman identity, were often perceived by some as a threat to the distinct cultural and religious identities of minority groups, leading to increased mistrust. The Ottoman Empire's decline, marked by internal strife, economic hardship, and a weakening central authority, created a breeding ground for intolerance and violence. Chapter 11: The Armenian Question. By the late 19th century, the Armenian question had emerged as a significant issue within the Ottoman Empire and on the international stage. The Armenian question referred to the status and treatment of the Armenian population within the Ottoman Empire, particularly in the eastern provinces where they constituted a significant minority. Armenians, facing increasing discrimination and violence, began to petition for greater autonomy and protection within the empire. These demands were often met with suspicion and hostility by the Ottoman government, which viewed them as a threat to its territorial integrity and a sign of foreign interference. European powers, particularly Russia and Great Britain, expressed concern over the plight of the Armenians, often using the Armenian question as a bargaining chip in their own geopolitical maneuvering within the declining Ottoman Empire. This external pressure, while intended to protect the Armenians, often had the opposite effect. The Ottoman government viewed these interventions as meddling in its internal affairs and further evidence of Armenian disloyalty. The Armenians, caught between the anvil of Ottoman oppression and the hammer of great power politics, found themselves increasingly vulnerable. The Armenian question, far from being resolved peacefully, became a focal point for nationalist tensions, political maneuvering, and ultimately the justification for genocide. Chapter 12. The role of religion. The Armenians, as Christians within a Muslim-majority empire, were often viewed with suspicion and distrust. The Ottoman government increasingly emphasized Islam as a unifying force, marginalizing non-Muslim minorities like the Armenians. Armenians were accused of collaborating with Christian powers, fueling animosity and justifying violence. During the genocide, Armenians were pressured to convert to Islam, and those who refused faced certain death. Chapter 13. Economic factors. The Ottoman Empire's economic decline led to widespread hardship and resentment. Armenians, perceived as more prosperous, became targets of envy and resentment. The Ottoman government's policies further aggravated these tensions, with discriminatory practices exacerbating inequalities. The outbreak of World War I heightened these tensions, leading to the confiscation of Armenian property and businesses. Chapter 14. Architects of Annihilation. Why are there not more people talking about the architects of the Armenian Genocide? At the heart of the Armenian Genocide lay the three pashas, Mehmed Talat, Ismail Enver, and Ahmed Cemal. These men, driven by nationalism and paranoia, viewed Armenians as an obstacle to their vision of a homogeneous Turkish state. They exploited the chaos of World War I to implement their genocidal plan. Their actions were a calculated, cold-blooded campaign rooted in a distorted sense of nationalism. Each pasha played a distinct role, intertwining their ambitions to create a perfect storm of brutality. Chapter 15. The Organizer. It's about Mehmed Talat Pasha, the Minister of Interior, who was the chief architect of the Armenian Genocide. He controlled the Ottoman bureaucracy, issuing coded telegrams to order the arrest, deportation, and elimination of Armenians. Talat's meticulous record-keeping provided irrefutable evidence of the Ottoman government's intent to exterminate the Armenians. He dismissed pleas for mercy, claiming deportations were necessary security measures. Talat established the special organization to carry out mass killings, terrorizing Armenian communities. Chapter 16. The ambitious nationalist Ismail Enver Pasha, the Minister of War, was consumed by his vision of a pan-Turkic empire. He saw Armenians as an obstacle to his ambitions and ordered the disarming of Armenian soldiers, leaving them vulnerable. Enver diverted troops to oversee deportations, ensuring the genocide remained a priority. He embraced Turkish nationalism, viewing Armenians as a foreign element threatening the Turkish nation. Enver dismissed reports of Armenian suffering as enemy propaganda, suppressing attempts to expose the truth. 17. The Ruthless Enforcer. What's something people don't know about Ahmed Cemal Pasha, the Minister of the Navy? He played a brutal role in the Armenian Genocide. Cemal oversaw the implementation of the genocide in the eastern provinces, ruling with an iron fist. He personally supervised deportation marches, ordering executions of those who couldn't keep up. Cemal established concentration camps in the Syrian desert, where Armenians faced starvation, disease, and mass murder. His cruelty created a climate of impunity, making violence against Armenians the norm. Chapter 18. A Legacy of Denial. The Armenian Genocide left an indelible scar on humanity's conscience. Despite overwhelming evidence, the Turkish government continues to deny the genocide. This denial compounds the suffering of the Armenian people, denying justice and truth. The three pashas evaded justice, with Talat assassinated in Berlin and Enver and Cemal meeting their ends far from their crimes. The legacy of the three pashas is one of death, destruction, and impunity. Chapter 19. A Nation Scattered. By 1923, the Ottoman Empire was replaced by the Republic of Turkey, determined to forge a new national identity. The genocide left Armenian communities in ruins, their cultural heritage in ashes. Survivors sought refuge in foreign lands, carrying the trauma of their experiences. The Armenian diaspora became the keepers of remembrance, rebuilding their lives and honoring their lost loved ones. The struggle for recognition and justice had just begun. Chapter 20. The struggle for recognition. Pause 2 seconds. The decades following the Armenian Genocide witnessed a tireless struggle for recognition and justice. The Turkish government embarked on a systematic campaign of denial, downplaying the death toll. The Armenian diaspora became the driving force behind the fight for recognition, organizing protests and lobbying governments. Their efforts slowly chipped away at the wall of denial. With countries like Uruguay, France, and the US recognizing the genocide, the fight for recognition continues, with Turkey still denying its responsibility. Chapter 21. The weight of memory. The trauma, passed down through generations, remains a defining element of their collective identity. The stories of the genocide are woven into the fabric of their lives, reminding them of loss and resilience. Every year, on April 24th, Armenians commemorate Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day, honoring the victims and reaffirming their commitment to justice. The genocide serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the devastating consequences of unchecked hatred.